Good morning.
Good morning.
So looking at our gospel lesson today, what question does Jesus get asked? What question does he get asked?
Who the wife belongs to.
Who the wife belongs to, which I think is a really interesting question. I don't know how many wives in here if I said, who do you belong to? Which is a really key pickup that we are talking about a different time than our current time. So basically Jesus asks, who will we be married to in heaven if we have had multiple spouses on earth? And on the surface, this seems like a pretty good question, right? I've had numerous parishioners who have lost their spouses, and they worry about this very question as they navigate both the idea of grief and loneliness. In fact, 6 years ago, this was the assigned gospel lesson for the very first time that I ever preached here at St. Peter's Lutheran Church. Many of you remember Pat Anderson, choir member, altar team member. She was on my call committee, and she told me that this very issue had worried and concerned her. You see, Pat Anderson had been Pat Coons for many years. Her husband, who she loved dearly, had died too young, and she was lonely for many, many years. Eventually, Pat met a man who she cared deeply about and who cared deeply about her, and they got married. Pat asked me who she would be with in heaven. This is a good question. It's an important question for many of us. You know, I don't know about you, where you are on your relationship. I kind of like my wife. And I have a hard time envisioning heaven without Erica being there with me as my wife, Mary. Incidentally, when I asked her about this situation, she was more concerned if our dogs would be in heaven. See where I am. And Jesus doesn't give us a very satisfying answer either. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God. What, Jesus? What does that mean? I am not entirely sure what Jesus is talking about. And I wonder if he would have been clearer if this question had been asked by a grieving person who had just lost their spouse. Or if this question had been asked by a lonely surviving spouse, wondering if it might be okay to love again, like our dear friend Pat. We remember that this question wasn't asked by someone who was suffering, but by the wealthy, the ruling group, the Sadducees. These folks, as it says in our lesson, don't even believe in the resurrection. So it seems like their question doesn't come from a legitimate concern for themselves or for others, but out of an attempt to trick, trap, or embarrass Jesus. For them, this is sort of a purely pointless question for the temple elites. All right? This is sort of a question similar to if you have ever heard somebody ask you, can God make a rock that is so heavy that God can't lift? They are asking a question to which they really don't care what the answer is. How many of us have ever had someone ask you a question in order to pick a fight with you or just distract you from a serious topic? This is what the Sadducees are trying to do to Jesus. And because of their intent, Jesus gives them an unsatisfying answer. And yet, that leaves us hanging as well. What will heaven be like, Jesus? What about our important relationships here and now? Who will Pat be with in heaven? Her first husband or her second husband? Will I know? Will I recognize Erica? As I confessed earlier, Jesus doesn't give us a clear, definitive answer. The most we get from Jesus is that heaven, our resurrection, will be different from our current life right now. Jesus seems to be telling us that heaven isn't just the things of this world and our current lives that we like and enjoy being times by like 100. Jesus' answer implies that our new eternal lives will be different. And this is emphasized by Jesus' continued use of the term resurrection. We only know of one person who's been raised to this new, deathless, eternal life, so maybe we should take a closer look at what Jesus Christ shows us after rising from the grave on that Easter morning. The resurrection. This is what I can gather. Stay with me here, and we'll see if you can add to my list. The resurrection, our eternal life will involve bodies. We're not going to be some floaty, ephemeral spirits floating around, but concrete bodies. When Jesus comes back, we see that he can be touched, as evidenced by Thomas placing his hands in Jesus' wounds. Jesus can eat food, as evidenced when they hand him a piece of fish to eat in front of his disciples. And yet, this body, this new body, this resurrected body, there is something different about it. We remember that his disciples and followers continually have trouble recognizing Jesus after he rose from the dead. So we learn that our resurrected bodies will be similar in some ways and very different in others. This is interesting to me, but not super helpful overall. I wonder if it might be more important to look at Jesus' relationships after resurrection rather than his physical appearance. Jesus clearly still knows and cares about his followers deeply. Jesus seeks out those who he had relationships with while on earth and continues caring for them, continues teaching them, continues empowering them. And yet, do things go back entirely to the way they were before Jesus was crucified? No. Resurrection isn't more of our old lives. It is not more of our old hurts, our old conflicts. Resurrection is new. Resurrection is a new life. The good news for me is found in Jesus' exchange with Peter on the beach after being raised from the dead. And you all remember the story, but I'll retell it anyway. Peter, the first disciple, the next leader of the disciples in the early church, one of Jesus' closest friends and confidants. What did he do on the last day of Jesus' life here on earth? Denied even knowing who he was. How many of us have been hurt like that? Somebody betraying us, denying us, letting us down. How many of us have had family, friends, or a spouse that we love deeply and yet have been hurt, disappointed, or let down by? This breach of trust, relationship, and love could have been toxic between Peter and Jesus, right? However, in his conversation with Peter on the beach, Jesus only speaks about love. Even after his betrayal, Jesus only brings up the love between the two friends. Where there could have been shame, where there could have been hard feelings and distance, Jesus returns Peter to a place of love and care and relationship. This gives me hope. And this is where I want to leave us. Whatever dies or changes when we leave this world, love does not die. Love goes on. Love continues. And this is good news for Pat. This is good news for me. And hopefully for the world. Thanks be to God. Amen.